In this session of the Purple Coffee podcast, I speak to the delightful Dorie Clark about conforming to yourself but respecting that of others. Oh yeah. Hello and welcome to session 30 of the Purple Coffee podcast, inspiring entrepreneurial stories from some of the world's finest. I am your host, Turndog, and on this occasion I speak to the delightful Dorie Clark about conforming to yourself and being a bit of a free spirit, but always considering that of others. After all, there's a fine line between being quirky and you, but being a bit of a a-hole. So yeah, we're going to be getting to the conversation with Dorie soon, but I just wanted to let you know how I came about her first and foremost. Well, for a few weeks, this girl, Dorie, kept appearing on my Facebook timeline, interviewing the likes of Scott Alford and Jordan Harbinger and Chris Brogan for places like Forbes and Harvard Business. I was like, who is this girl? She knows everyone. She knows those I know, and her writing is super sweet and awesome. I need to know her. So I reached out to Dorie, and what a sweetheart she was. She agreed to be part of the Successful Mistake, share some stories, and has been such a delight to know since. She isn't just a fine writer who contributes for the likes of Forbes, among many, many others, but a great marketing strategist too, and a fine speaker who's been traveling the globe of late and doing some pretty cool stuff. So I'll be putting all the links to Dorie and her world on tdog.co purple coffee 30. That's t.co/purple coffee 30. So be sure to check that out. You'll be able to find all her links, and yeah, she's someone who you will learn a great deal from. So yeah, welcome to Dorie if you don't already know her. But it was in Illinois, The Successful Mistake, which, as you can imagine, is a book I'm writing regarding an entrepreneur's great mistake and how they transform it into something gooey and good. And Dorie came at it from a pretty different angle. I've spoken to quite a few people regarding conformity and how they try to fit into a square peg despite being a bit of a sphere themselves. You know, trying to play the standard marketing consultant role, even though you might be really colourful and as such coming across rather beige and dull and, you know, several shades of grey, I suppose. Well, Dorie came at it from a different view. As she looks back on her life, she thinks, well, as an employee, I wasn't the best because I didn't consider my boss's thing, whether that's the way you dress or the way you talk, the way you act. And it's had a great impact on how she works for herself now as an entrepreneur, because she's always working with clients and she's always working at conferences and event organisers and has to think, how can I come across so I'm showcasing my awesome self, but in a way that's respectful for others? Because otherwise you can become a bit stubborn, a bit stuck in your ways, and can come across rather arrogant and such. So this is a very important outlook, and I'm so glad Dorie shared it, because it's one I haven't come across all too often. So we're going to be getting straight into this wonderful conversation. But before we do, I've written a quick story regarding Dorie so you can learn a little bit more about her and see and peek into her world. So I've done it in a story because, you know, that's what I do. So here we go. I'm going to read it right now. I reached out to Dorie Clark because I heard through some ridiculous rumour mill she inspired the famous character Dory from Finding Nemo. This is a lie. Looking back, I shouldn't have been so gullible, but I'm not bad because such Pixar geek love enticed me to reach out to her in the first place, and a life where you know Dorie Clark is an uber good one. I first realised she couldn't be Fish Dorie because she has an awesome memory. She knows everyone. She knows those who know the people you want to know, and connecting folk through the art of writing amazing content. A marketing strategy consultant and speaker and author, but none of this does Miss Dorie justice. Instead, I look at her as some superhero connector with a heart made of chocolate gold coins. Here's to Dorie. Long let her awesome life live on and prosper. Yeah. So here's Dorie and me chatting. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you ever so much for joining me. I'm delighted this evening to have with me Dorie Clark, who is a marketing strategist and an author. She has a couple of books to her name. Reinventing You, Define Your Brand, Imagine Your Future being one of them, and it's something that certainly aligns with my style, so I can't wait to read this book. And Dorie's worked with some fantastic people, does a lot of speaking too, and I came across Dorie when she wrote a few articles for a few people who appeared in The Successful Mistake. So Dorie, first of all, thank you ever so much for being here and joining me.
Matt, thank you. This is fantastic.
I'm so excited to have you part of things. You've, like I say, I know that you've written a few articles about people, or included them in your articles for things like Forbes and Harvard Business Review, people who appeared in the book. And I thought, well, I'm always eager to read interviews and articles featuring the people I know. And then when I came across you, I thought, I want to know Dorie too. She needs to be part of a Success Mistake. So happy to have you involved in all this.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's august company.
Definitely, indeed. Well, we're going to kick things off into your great mistake soon. Those regular listeners and viewers will know that this is in aid of my book, The Successful Mistake, a book all about an entrepreneur's grand faux pas and how they switched it around and such. But before we do all that, I'm hoping you can just share a little bit more about yourself and the journey that you've taken over years to get from where you were to I suppose, where you are. So, yeah, give us that quick bio.
Certainly, Matt. Yes. So a lot of my my bio and my background is about reinvention, which ended up being the topic of my first book. Some people might say there were some mistakes in there. I actually ended up on a very different path than I initially imagined for myself. I started out, I had gotten a master's degree in theology, and I originally thought I wanted to be a literature professor, but I got turned down by all of the doctoral programs that I applied to. So I had to come up with another plan for myself. And then I became a political reporter, which was great. And until I got laid off about a year into my career as the newspaper industry was starting to decline, and then I was able to bounce back and reinvent myself as a political campaign spokesperson. And I worked on a governor's race in Massachusetts in the U.S. and then on a U.S. presidential campaign. And those were terrific experiences, but both of my candidates lost. So yet again, I needed to reinvent myself. So there's been a lot of stuff along the way. I also ran a nonprofit. I also made a documentary film. Finally, 8 years ago, I started my current business that I do with marketing strategy consulting. And so as pieces of that, I now write books and speak and teach for some business schools as well as the consulting. So it's been a good eclectic ride.
It really has, and it's so interesting. I've spoken to a few people who, look at things in the reinvention space. Steve Olsher comes to mind, who is a great person in terms of reinvention. He's taken a very varied journey too, and you are the second person in relatively quick time span for me who have been part of presidential campaigns. I spoke to John Cochrane, and I imagine that you and John have a lot to talk about in that sense. Coming from the political game into writing books and marketing must be quite the different step.
Yes, it's true. It's true. And John is fantastic. His all of his stuff is, I think, very high quality. So I would recommend that to anybody to check that out. He does a lot of good stuff about networking and making connections, very thoughtful.
Oh, absolutely. And in terms of political campaigning, I suppose it is all about connections, but also on the branding side and communication side of things. Marketing is ultimately trying to get a message across to a certain type of person. And in essence, I suppose that's politics. It's getting messages across to the people and hoping that they agree enough to vote for you.
Yeah, politics is great training for marketing. I mean, it's essentially because, as you say, you have to define your message, you have to get your message across, but it's actually even more stressful than most brand marketing because you simultaneously have an opponent that is trying to poke holes in you and to mess with you. And sometimes in marketing, like maybe if you're Coke versus Pepsi, you get something like that. But mostly, you don't have people who are deliberately out there to try to mess with you. So being able to develop enough strategic acumen to deal with that, as well as the more basic considerations of disseminating your message, is definitely a good way to hone your chops.
Absolutely. I imagine it must have been. And yeah, you must have met some quite interesting folk. But we won't get into the politics because that is always a rough and rocky road to get down. So instead we'll focus on the
Yes.
lovely, charming world of mistakes because, well, I suppose that links in rather well with politicians, actually.
Yes.
I'm eager to hear your great mistake. This is what the interview's in aid of after all. And I'm sure after your very eclectic ride, you've made a few mistakes and faux pas along the way. So I'm just going to pass it over to you. And I'm hoping that you can share your grand issue, your grand mistake, the thing that nearly ended you, but then you were able to turn it around, and the lessons you've learned since. So yeah, tell us that journey and we'll take it from there, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that when I think back on mistakes that I've made, probably probably a big one. And when I'm giving advice to people now, I do a lot of speaking for people who are in corporations and things like that. I think back on the fact that I think I actually it's terrible to have to say about myself, but I wasn't that good of an employee, and there were a lot of things that are kind of basic that I didn't do that well, and I mean. The upside, of course, when you talk about turning it into something good, is that I over time came to learn how to do things better, and it sort of pushed me in the direction of being an entrepreneur, where now I'm really able to kind of call the shots myself. But when I think back about mistakes that I make, I mean, they were really it was like stupidly hard for me to get to work on time in the morning when I was a reporter. I never liked to dress up for work. I was too kind of like too buddy buddy with my boss and didn't retain enough professional distance. And those are all things that like it's kind of silly because now you look back and you see a lot of people who are like 21 or 22 years old and it's like, oh, that's ridiculous. Of course, why don't they know this? But it's embarrassing for me to have had to go through that process of like if I had hired me, I probably would have been somewhat frustrated. I mean, I could do good work, but I really, sort of had this like ideology about, it shouldn't matter what time I'm in the office and, that kind of thing. And I mean, I still have that ideology, which is why I'm an entrepreneur. I mean, I work very hard. And, now I'm just as likely to be working from, 10 p.m. to midnight as, I am, other times. I do think that the organization of the future is about optimizing your performance and doing things, from wherever and making sure that, that people are actually able to contribute in a way that creates meaningful results rather than just FaceTime. Like those things are all, I think, valid points. But if you're an employee and you've bought into the constraints of a system, it's not really a valid point. You need to learn how to play along within that system. And I didn't really do it that well. And I think that, I was legitimately laid off. I wasn't fired from my job as a reporter. They were like laying off other people. But I think I did not do. I think that it was probably an easier call to pick me rather than somebody else because I was not, doing the sort of standard things of, some of the other eager beavers that I worked with who were getting in at, 7 o'clock in the morning and reading all the news sites before they started their day.
It's something I can relate to a great deal. I feel like the biggest reason I actually got into working for myself is I just considered myself very difficult to be an employee. This idea of saying yes all the time and, biting my lip maybe when I shouldn't have done. I wasn't always the greatest employee, and I imagine a lot of new entrepreneurs out there are nodding their head right now because more often than not, we want to work for ourselves after working for other people for a few years or for a few decades.
Yeah.
And just hate it. You don't like necessarily the rules, playing to other people's rules, all these things. And I've got one of my best friends was always terrible with time management. A bit like you, turned up to work a lot. Fantastic at everything he did, but the one thing which always was on his record was this idea of you showed up at like 9:15 every single day, whereas everyone else was turning up at 8:45. Like,
Yep.
why couldn't you figure it out? And then he started working for his dad, and one day he's going to be taking over that business, and you just think, wow, are you going to be able to like turn up on time? Are you going to be able to wake up at 6 o'clock and go into the office when it needs to be done? But the mindset can change once you start working for yourself. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I suppose the big question I get from all that is, like, what have you learned? Because even though we work for ourselves, and as entrepreneurs, we get to make the rules. So it's like if you don't want to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and you want to work later at night, then you can. But there are times when you're working with clients and you need to adhere to their company culture. You need to maybe, not necessarily conform, because I'm a firm believer that you can be yourself and thrive in this modern day. But this idea of sometimes you have to play by other people's rules because they're maybe paying you money to do a particular job. What have you learned from being an employee? And I guess getting that balance between working for yourself and making your own rules, but also stepping up to the plate and doing what you have to at times.
Yeah, absolutely. I think and it's a very good question. For me, the biggest thing that I learned is that when you are an entrepreneur, it's, honestly, it's not even about the sort of immediate thing of like, oh, well, I want to work when I want to work. It's about, although it is nice that you generally have more leeway and you can do those things, it is about the larger goal of what you're trying to accomplish. And I think that for anyone to be successful in an organization, and I think that, when I was, 21 years old and, starting this job at a newspaper, I was not really clued in enough to be able to do this properly. Is that if you want to be really successful at whatever you're doing, whether it's working for yourself or working for someone else, you have to have the really big picture in mind, because everything else is secondary beyond that. I was very narrowly focused, and now I deride people like this, on, oh well, what is it your job to do and what is it not your job to do, and just sort of drawing these boundaries. And as an entrepreneur, it's very easy to be able to say, you know what, it's fine. If I need to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to have a call with a client in China or something like that, then that is what I'm going to do, because I'm going to make this venture successful. And, you don't have to do it every day of your life, but you do what needs to be done because there's a larger goal in mind. And I think that when I am called upon to give advice to people who are still working in corporations, that's the thing, is how can you tap into something, some element of what your company does, or, some kind of goal that you want to accomplish, so that you feel like there's a bigger mission that you can be aspiring toward. A few years later, a few years after I, had my job at the newspaper and got laid off, and when I was working in politics, I had this employee, and I realized that he was like the best employee that I ever had. And I was really put to shame, because I realized, like, oh man, this is how I should have been. And what he would do is he would come into my office and he would just ask the question. He'd be like, so what can I do to make your life easier? And I'm like, oh my God, that's like amazing. Who asks that question? And I feel like if people are asking that question either as an employee to their employer, or as a consultant to the clients that they're working with, if that is the mindset of really trying to make other people's lives better and easier, then you will always have as much business as you want to have.
That's really interesting. I suppose it works the other way as well. To the new entrepreneur who's maybe just getting out of the working world, they maybe didn't leave because they, without this eager thing of just working for someone else, they weren't a good employee. Maybe they were a good employee, such a good employee, in fact, that, it makes sense for them to start their own business. So
Yeah.
it's equally as important to get into that mindset of what's the big question here? Like, what's my big
Hmm.
meaning? Because it's no longer about showing up and doing your job. It's like you get to make the rules now, so you need to be able to step up to the plate and not just do the bare minimum, but go above and beyond when in need.
Yes, exactly.
So give us a couple of examples of maybe a few things, what you have done since working for yourself, where looking back, that 21-year-old version of yourself when you were working for someone else wouldn't have done. You talked about that idea of waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning for a client call. Has it come across in other parts of sort of your world today, be it sort of the way that you dress, the way that you show up, the way that you maybe do research with clients?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, one thing that I've realized that I think that I scoffed at when I was 21 and fresh out of graduate school is that, I mean, just at a very surface level, even just sort of starting at the surface and moving in, that that what is the function of clothing? Like, is it, it's on one hand, it's sort of stupid to dress up, but on the other hand, when you realize that clothing is a sign of respect, that literally is what it is. It's not just like this dictate, like, oh, you have to dress this way because you have to dress this way. When you're an entrepreneur, you get to choose. And if you want to be working in your sweatpants, that's fine. You do that. You do that on your own as much as you want. But when you are meeting with clients, when you are meeting with influential people, and this is why someone like Mark Zuckerberg, got so much flack, like going to Wall Street, in a hoodie. It's when you refuse to dress up for other people, it is a sign. It is taken as a sign that you do not respect them, and that's a tough lesson. Understanding that you do this not because you have to, and therefore you're fighting the man if you don't do it, but because you want to be gracious to other people. That's something that I learned that was a little different from when I was younger. I mean, another basic thing too is understanding that a lot of times busy people kind of play chicken with timing, and they want to like get in as much work or as much whatever until they leave for a meeting. But it is important to try to be on time, or early, or at a minimum no more than like 5 minutes late, because as you get higher in your career, literally the amount of time that it is costing people to be with you gets higher and higher, and sometimes it's almost unimaginably high, the opportunity cost of them taking that time to be with you, and you need to treat it as the precious thing that it is.
And I suppose those things, but it just revolves around this idea of respect. And sometimes as employees, we can think we're being respectful in the sense that we're doing our job. But then we're not thinking from the other person's point of view that, turning up even 5 minutes late every other day of the week is a sign of disrespect. Not dressing up in the sense of what everyone else does, or showing up to the big meetings without a shirt and tie, even though it might not be important to you. If that's really important to your boss, it's not always a case of conforming. It's just a case of, well, I respect my boss, I respect the position that I'm in, and I want to, like you said earlier, make his or her life easier. And it's
Yeah.
interesting that you talk about clothing. I just read an article the other day by Neil Patel, who talked about how he'd spent $160,000 in a year on clothing, which was at a complete extreme end of things. But
He spent that much money? That's
yeah,
amazing. Him and
absolutely.
Sarah Palin. Wow. I
Uh,
hope he bought some designer dresses or something.
he said that he bought what was it? It was something like a $4,000 hoodie, which ended up just like going running in. He went on the extreme side of things, but he talked about how as soon as he started doing this, even though like when he gets a chance to work at home or around the office, he's wearing like sweatpants and a basketball shirt or whatever. When he's going out and he's going to meetings, he's wearing these really nice clothes, and it had an immediate impact on the type of deals that he was closing. It was introducing him to other people because people were taking him seriously. They had this perception of like, he's dressing successful, he must be successful, I believe in him. And it's an amazing thing that sometimes, even though you don't want to conform, it's not a case of like, well, I'm going to wear the grey suit because that's what every marketing consultant does. I'm a firm believer in you can be yourself, and you should find ways to have the situation conform to you rather than you to conform the situation. But
Yeah.
showing the situation respect, and I suppose to an extent playing up to the man, can really pay dividends, not just with clients, but the way that you come across with your employees and everything else in between. A little thing like clothing, but it really can have a huge aspect on your world.
Yeah, I think that's really well put, Matt. Absolutely.
And it just all comes back to this idea of respect. And as soon as you become a self-employed person or you have your own business, I suppose your outlook on respect is completely different because all of a sudden you've got people disrespecting you, maybe as employees, and it might not mean much to you, but you're constantly having to think, okay, this is what I believe in, but what do other people believe in? How's this going to affect my employees? How's this going to affect the client who's paying me a lot of money to do a job? Is it a case of, if I wear a tie, is that going to make him happy? Is that going to make him believe more in me? It's a little thing, but that idea of respect can take you a long way in your career.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's a good framework for almost anything. I mean, it's a framework for the quality of your product. It's the framework for the quality of your customer service. I mean, I spent a ridiculous like 45 minutes on the phone today with my brokerage, and it turned out after the fact that they were trying to get this transfer to go through, and it turns out afterwards that it was a fruitless quest because structurally they, even though they had allowed me to set up the mechanism, they weren't permitted to do that transfer. That type of transfer wasn't actually even allowed. And so they literally, from the moment one, wasted 45 minutes of my time. And as an entrepreneur, I now think about that and I think, wow, what could I have been doing? How much money? I mean, that could be hundreds of dollars, it could be thousands of dollars. And, they felt bad and they're like, oh, we can give you a few free trades. I'm like, well, that's nice. But really what I'm thinking of in the back of my mind is how can I, now we're in the end of the year rush, but later, how can I transfer my business to a company that respects me more? Because I don't need to ever waste 45 minutes on a goose chase, and I would rather do business with somebody that had more respect for their customers from the get-go.
That is such a good point. And I suppose it works on the other side of things too, because whenever I go through a bad experience with a company like that, where you're stuck on the phone for a bit, you constantly think like, what can I do as an entrepreneur to ensure that that never happens to my customers? And sometimes when you look back on who you were as a 19 or 20-year-old, it's like, what kind of pain points were I causing my boss or, whoever around me? And what can I do to make sure I'm not doing the same now? And not just me as an individual, but ensure that my employees are doing the same. And when I create a new product or a new service or every little kind of touch point in and around your business, how can I make the whole process easier? And you said it earlier, this idea of like, how can I make your life easier? Sometimes you don't always even have to say it. It's just the fact that if you implement it in everything that you do, it's just passing through and you make sure that these pain points are never happening.
Yes, exactly.
And being stuck on the phone for 45 minutes is just a complete and utter sort of definition of, you don't respect my time, you don't respect me, you're putting me through a process. And it's difficult to always comprehend this sometimes as an employee, but as soon as you have your own business, it becomes loud and clear.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You're able, the scales fall from your eyes and you're able to see things that you couldn't necessarily have seen before once you're an entrepreneur.
Absolutely. So going forward, we've talked about a few things in how you look back on being the not so great employee that you were. These days, I'm assuming that you hire certain people, whether it's a virtual assistant, whether it's someone in person, whether it's a freelancer of sorts. Has it affected how you look to hire new people and to maybe collaborate on projects? I'm assuming it's obviously helped you become a more efficient person when you're writing for someone and you're making sure that you're handing stuff in time. But has it altered your perception on how you see people? Do you give people more of a break because you understand that they might only be 21? Or has it made your entire process a bit more strict?
Yeah, it's probably made my process a little bit more strict. I mean, I think though that the the orientation that I have, that I strive to have is to just really focus on results. And I hope that the world goes to this more and more. I mean, there's a really innovative thing that Best Buy used to do, this theory that they had called the results only work environment, and they did that for a few years, and then they shut it down. Which just seems criminal to me. But the idea was that that it was like the dream of my 21-year-old self, that you could come in whenever, you could do whatever you want as long as you get the work done. And it seemed very progressive. But the people who came up with it, they have a consulting company, and so they've been trying to spread that gospel through a variety of different organizations. But I do think that with the rise of the freelancer economy, and I certainly use, Elance and Odesk and things like that, Zirtual, which is a virtual assistant site. I use all of those, and what they have really driven, which I think is powerful, is that you can work anytime you want, you can work any place you want, and the only thing that just makes me angry is if somebody makes a promise that they don't fulfill. If they say that they'll get me the transcript on Thursday at noon, and it's like Monday and they haven't gotten it to me, I'll be pretty mad and won't necessarily want to work with that person again, because that's the only thing. Um, because of these virtual environments, I think it's fantastic in the leeway that you have, but I think what it calls upon people to do is that it requires more self-discipline and more self-control. I think that for some people, sitting in an office for 8 hours a day was actually kind of useful because it enforced an external control on you. And so, if you're like a big procrastinator or something like that, or you're terrible at estimating time and juggling things, it forced that discipline on you. Now we have more opportunity to do what we want, and also simultaneously more opportunity to blow up opportunities and screw them up. So yeah, the only thing that really gets me going is if somebody, particularly if I really need something, and they fall through on their promises.
No, I can understand that, and I think you bring up some great points there. I love the way that James L. touches on things with this idea that we're moving into a sort of contract employment thing where no one's going to be an employee per se in the future. We're all just going to be contractors. And I
Yeah,
personally love it because it brings us back to your original point where it gives people meaning. You can become sometimes a bit of a lazy employee, not in the sense that you're doing a bad job, but you just take things for granted and you go through the motions. Whereas if you're your own boss, you might not be an entrepreneur by trade in the sense that you're hiring people and you're building a business, but you're just working for yourself and you're taking matters into your own hands. It forces you to, show up and to think
yeah,
about, like, what's my meaning here? Like, what's the big question? I wasn't asking this when I was hired by someone else, but now that I'm having to actually go out and sell my services to lots of different people and be a contractor, it's making me look into things a complete different way. And it
yeah.
gives people that self-discipline and that focus of, like, what am I actually doing and how can I do it a little bit better than everyone else so people are going to pay me that little bit more, hire me that little bit extra.
Yeah, that's very well put.
Excellent. Well, I think that just about ties everything up. It's been an absolute joy. I've loved the journey. But before we do, if you can just maybe give a bit of advice, and I'm thinking the young entrepreneur out there, because we're seeing more and more 19, 20, 22-year-olds starting up their
Yeah.
businesses. It's great to see. But I know what I was like in my late teens and early 20s. And I remember what my friends were like. And I remember what most people are like. And it's not always the most mature and entrepreneurial sort of place in your life. So if you could kind of give a little bit of advice to those individuals, and I suppose your younger self too, in terms of just providing a bit more respect to those around you and a bit more respect for yourself and that big meaning that you can strive towards, what would it be?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when I think back on the sort of foundational mistake, I guess, of my late teens and early 20s, that maybe all the other mistakes sprung from, it was that I had a really sort of fixed ideology, and so I felt whatever I was doing, I felt really super justified in doing, because I had a rationale for it. And oh well, I'm not dressing up because I don't want to live in a conformist society, and all these things that have like a grain of truth to them, but are just not quite right if you play them out and think about what they mean to other people. And so I think that the biggest advice that I would have for younger entrepreneurs, especially, but maybe for anyone, is to just try to think about dialing back that level of certainty. It doesn't mean you have to give up your principles, but it does mean introducing just enough room, just enough doubt to understand that other people may see things slightly differently. And that if you are coming across a certain way, it's not necessarily that these other people are idiots, but it could be that there is some validity to their interpretation. um, that that you don't always have to be right, and you can approach things a lot of different ways. You don't have to give up your principles, but it may help to have some nuances.
Mm. No, I think that's very good advice, and I think about the cliche saying of just walk in someone else's shoes, and I think we can all sort of take that advice from time to time. Just that thought of, well, I do have principles and I do believe in something. It means a great deal to me, but if I just step out of my ego for a second and think about this from the other person's point of view, maybe just wearing a tie could make all the difference in the world, and it could just be something really small. So Dorie, thank you ever so much. It's been a true pleasure, and yeah, it's great to see that your journey come from there, and it certainly helped you, I suppose, set a real solid foundation these days, and you're now able to help people with the things which you maybe weren't so great at back in the day.
That's right. Thank you so much. It's been great having the conversation with you, Matt.
Dorie, all the pleasure in mine, and thank you for watching and listening. So yeah, from the two of us, cheers. And there you have it, guys and gals, another session of the Purple Coffee Podcast at an end. A big thanks to you for listening, and a huge thanks to Dorie for taking part, not just in The Successful Mistake, a book I'm very proud of, but this fine podcast too, the Purple Coffee Podcast. I love her insight, and it was a fresh one. I've come across quite a few people who tried to conform to their industry and how they thought they needed to look and act and be, and it didn't really work out for them too well. The person who springs to mind automatically is when I spoke to Marion Cantwell, and how it certainly stifled her awesome personality. But I suppose with Dorie it was the opposite outlook, and although she looks back as a life as an employee, I think it has great effect on who she is today as an entrepreneur. Because yes, you want to stand out and be quirky and make sure your style is coming across at all times, but you must always think about the other person too. When you write a book or create a course or working with a new client, how are you coming across? Are you aligning with their style? Are you going to scare them off? Are you going to offend them? It's a fine balance, and I think it takes a little bit of time to master, but it all begins with being just conscious of the fact. If it's just all about you, and it's like, well, I want to dress the way I dress because it's all about me, then you're going to be very stubborn. You're going to be a little narrow-minded, and I don't think it will lead to a good place. But if you're constantly thinking, how can I make sure myself and the other person align and we can meet somewhere in the middle, good things can happen. And in the end of the day, if your personality doesn't match with their personality, it's probably not going to be a good working relationship. So it also acts as a fantastic filter as to who your clients should and should not be. So a big thanks to Dorie for a great insight. I'm sure you've taken a lot from this conversation, and I hope you will follow her and read all her amazing content. If you head over to tdog.co/purple Coffee 30, you'll find all the links to her world and some links and tweetables and highlights of this show. And whilst there, please consider subscribing, rating and reviewing this podcast, be it through Stitcher or iTunes or however you've listened. All the details are there. It will take you just a couple of seconds, so please consider doing that. But that's it. This is another session at the end. It's been an absolute damn pleasure. Keep it cool and breezy. Until next time, you're awesome.